then, when you got to be a sales manager of the company, it was your job not to work in the company so much as to go out and see your biggest customers and go to a bar and drink with them, and schmooze, if you like. And that was your association with being a sales manager, uh, to endear the customer to the company. And that was the way it was done. Well, when I complained about Val Galka, he started to be quite a drunk, and he started to put out memos that were one line. That the offerings of the day. I remember one was an alignment tool for 19 cents, and that was all it was on the sheet of paper. And then the next week we got another. Every week we had a sales meeting. The next week we got a sales meeting, and it was a piece of paper, and it says, this week's special is the same as last week's special. Alignment tool, 19 cents. So I went running to the general manager and I says, this is crap. I mean, this is terrible. This is not progressing the company at all. The guy is just a drunken bum. And so I laid that onto the onto the shoulders of the general manager. Anyway, it wasn't long after that he got so drunk he couldn't even come to work. So they had a whole bunch of salesmen. There was about 6 or 7 of us that were salesmen under Val Galka, and they're all older than me. And one of them was particular senior. That was the Russian guy that I kid about. That you better don't. But he was the most senior. So anyway, they had to choose a sales manager. They couldn't have that position unattended. And I'm not a schmooze type of guy. I'm a worker. So anyway, prior to them selecting somebody, I started to make something that turned out to be the parts parade. Remember the parts parade?
I do.
With the big little books and everything else. So I went and made a publication type of thing, and I give that to the general manager, and I says, if I'm sales manager, this is what I can do. And he was impressed, the fact that I'd gone to so much trouble, and it was a valid thing that I was presenting to him, that when the time came to select somebody for the sales manager, I was selected. And for the next 6 months, I had an awful time on my hands trying to have them obey me. Like I was the youngest one of the bunch, and they were all senior to me, and they weren't about to take orders from me, or any kind of instruction. But what I did was I just worked harder than they did, and I stayed ahead of them, thought of things before they thought of them, and finally I gained their respect. It took about 6 or 8 months, I think, and finally they started to listen. And that's how I got that job. And so then the other thing is I was working one day on my drawing board, making the parts parade and everything else, and IR, who was the boss, the owner, he came by and he says, what are you doing that stuff for? He says, you should be out schmoozing with the big customers, like old school. And I says, well, if I go out schmoozing, I can be only talking to one customer at a time. I says, this way I could be talking to 5,000 customers at a time. So he thought about that for a second and walked off. He walked away. He didn't really have an argument for that. He was a one-liner guy anyway. But that quelled the argument, the fact that I had an audience of 5,000 rather than just one. So that's how I got the sales manager's job, and that's how I conduct myself. And I stayed indoors most of the time making these parts parades, and it was a very successful run. And all the customers were anxiously awaiting next week's parts parade. I made them every week.
It was essentially a catalog, wasn't it?
It was like it was a sale. It was a flyer. It was one of the first flyers that people make. It was a special. Like we had the big catalog that cost $1 million actually. That was done by a publishing house, and it was 900 pages or something. But this was specials. This is something that's new and special and or lower price or something. It was the beginning of a flyer. And I kept on making those, and they were very well received because I even heard back that somebody says, I didn't get my flyer this week, So it was very successful. And
I remember the mascot for the flyer was that Electro guy, the little spaceman.
Yeah, it was Electro, the Sonic Messenger, because that was the name of our company, Electrosonic. So the cartoon that I picked up was called Electro. So I added Sonic to it, and then that became the logo for the company. And even today, when the company was sold and it went into the United States, and Marty had given it to his son and everything else, they kept that logo, Electro, the Sonic Messenger. He retained that logo, even
that's neat.
20 years later.
I remember also that you spent hours at home doing it, and you'd have a knife and you cut out all the pieces and you glued them onto the
That's right.
the paper with rubber cement.
That's right.
And then I would come out afterwards, and my job was to rule the edges of all the bits
with a rubber cement eraser.
Yeah, and then you'd make this little ball of dried up rubber cement, and that's what would pick up the new rubber cement that was excess around the edges.
That's right.
And I used to love to play with those rubber cement erasers.
Yeah. That's what eventually killed Donnie. You know.
What's that?
Acetone in the rubber cement.
Oh.
Because that's where they used it in putting taking the insoles and stuff out of the shoes.
Oh.
They would glue the insoles back in with rubber cement, and of course you're bending over, just like onions. You're bending over, and the fumes were coming up. And he was doing that for 20 years with Dad, and apparently this is what we hear, that he died of acetone poisoning.
Really?
Yeah. You didn't know that?
I didn't know that. No.
Well, he went in for something wrong with his leg, and he never come out of the hospital, and this is what I don't know whether I was told it or how I got the information, but it was acetone poisoning, and I believe it because he was working so many years doing that, you know.